The morning mist clung to the rocky ridge like a stubborn ghost, refusing to lift even as the sun climbed higher. Sarah Martinez adjusted her grip on the radio equipment, her fingers already cramping from the cold mountain air. At 22, she was the youngest member of Bravo Company's communications team, and everyone reminded her of it daily. "Support personnel, remember your place," Sergeant Collins had barked during the pre-mission briefing. "You're here to keep the radios working and stay out of the way. Leave the real soldiering to the infantry." Sarah bit back her response then, just as she had countless times before. Growing up in rural Montana, she had been shooting since she could hold a rifle steady. Her father, a former Marine sniper, had taught her that precision and patience were more valuable than size or strength. But here in the Army, none of that seemed to matter. She was classified as communications support, and that label followed her like a shadow. The ridge they occupied overlooked a strategic valley where intelligence suggested enemy forces would attempt to move supplies under cover of darkness. Alpha Company held the northern approach, while Charlie Company secured the southern route. Bravo Company, including Sarah's communications team, was positioned on the high ground to coordinate between all units and provide overwatch. "Martinez, check the backup radio again," called out Staff Sergeant Williams, the communications team leader. "If we lose contact with headquarters during the operation, it'll be your fault." Sarah nodded and ran through the equipment checklist for the third time that morning. Everything was functioning perfectly, but she had learned that being thorough was the only way to avoid blame when things went wrong. As she worked, she could hear the infantry soldiers joking and sharing stories about previous missions. None of them included her in their conversations. The isolation wasn't new. Since joining the Army 2 years ago, Sarah had faced constant reminders that she didn't belong in combat roles. During basic training, drill sergeants had openly questioned whether women could handle the physical demands of military service. In her current unit, she was often assigned to administrative tasks, while male soldiers with less experience were given field assignments. "At least you're safe back here with the radios," Private Johnson had told her once, thinking he was being kind. "Combat's no place for someone like you anyway." Someone like you? The phrase echoed in her mind as she tested the radio frequencies. Someone small, someone female, someone who was supposed to be grateful for being allowed to serve at all, even in a support capacity. But Sarah had never wanted to be safe. She had enlisted to serve her country, to test herself against the same challenges that had shaped her father and grandfather before him. Instead, she found herself perpetually on the sidelines, watching others take the risks she was trained to handle. The ridge position gave her an excellent view of the entire valley below. Through her binoculars, she could see the winding dirt road that served as the main supply route for enemy forces. The terrain was perfect for an ambush, with natural cover and multiple escape routes. It was also perfect for long-range precision shooting, she noted automatically, her father's training still sharp in her mind. As the day progressed, radio chatter increased. Reconnaissance drones had spotted movement 30 kilometers south. Enemy vehicles were approaching the valley, likely planning to transit during the night when American air support would be limited. All units were placed on high alert. Sarah monitored multiple radio frequencies simultaneously, relaying messages between the scattered companies and maintaining contact with the command post. It was demanding work that required intense concentration, but she performed it flawlessly. Years of being underestimated had taught her that perfect execution was the only way to avoid criticism. "Good work on the comms, Martinez," Staff Sergeant Williams acknowledged during a brief lull. "You might actually have a future in the Army after all." The backhanded compliment stung, but Sarah maintained her professional composure. She had learned early that emotional reactions only reinforced stereotypes about women in combat roles. Better to prove herself through quiet competence than dramatic gestures that would be dismissed as attention-seeking. As evening approached, the temperature dropped and the wind picked up. Sarah pulled her jacket tighter and continued monitoring the radios. Intelligence updates indicated that the enemy convoy would reach the valley sometime after midnight. All American forces were to maintain radio silence once the operation began, using only prearranged signals unless an emergency arose. The waiting was always the hardest part. Sarah had participated in enough field exercises to know that the hours before contact were when nerves frayed and mistakes happened. Soldiers checked their weapons repeatedly, adjusted their gear, and made nervous jokes to break the tension. She used the time to review her own equipment one final time. The radios were functioning perfectly, backup batteries were charged, and all frequency cards were properly installed. If communications failed during the operation, it wouldn't be due to any oversight on her part. In the fatting light, Sarah noticed movement among the infantry positions. Soldiers were settling into their firing positions, checking fields of fire and confirming range estimates to key terrain features. She watched them with a mixture of respect and envy, knowing that when the shooting started, they would have the chance to make a real difference in the outcome. Her own role would be crucial but largely invisible. She would coordinate between units, relay target information, and call for support when needed. It was important work that required skill and training, but it wasn't the kind of direct action that earned recognition or respect from her peers. As darkness fell over the ridge, Sarah settled in for what promised to be a long night. The enemy convoy was still hours away, but military operations rarely went according to schedule. She would need to stay alert and ready to respond to whatever developed in the valley below. The stars emerged one by one in the clear mountain sky, providing just enough light for her to see the shadowy outlines of her fellow soldiers. Tomorrow, if all went well, they would have successfully disrupted enemy supply lines and struck a significant blow against hostile forces in the region. But first, they had to survive the night. The enemy convoy arrived 43 minutes ahead of schedule, throwing carefully laid plans into chaos. Sarah was monitoring the reconnaissance frequency when the urgent report crackled through her headset. Multiple vehicles approaching from the south, estimated 15 trucks with armed escorts. She immediately switched to the command frequency to relay the information, but static filled her earpiece. The atmospheric conditions that had been perfect for communications all day had suddenly shifted, creating interference across multiple bands. Sarah's training kicked in automatically as she adjusted frequencies and power levels, fighting to maintain contact with all units. "Williams, I've got comms problems with Alpha Company," she whispered urgently to her team leader. "The interference is getting worse." Staff Sergeant Williams cursed under his breath and grabbed his own handset, confirming the communication breakdown. Without reliable radio contact, the carefully coordinated ambush would fall apart. Alpha Company wouldn't know when to initiate contact, and Charlie Company might open fire at the wrong moment, potentially hitting American forces instead of enemy targets. Sarah worked frantically with her equipment, trying every technique she knew to restore clear communications. She switched antenna configurations, adjusted power outputs, and even repositioned herself to find clearer reception. Nothing worked completely, though she managed to establish intermittent contact with some units. Through her binoculars, she could see the convoy moving through the valley below. The vehicles were spaced further apart than intelligence had predicted, making them harder targets for the planned ambush. Worse, they were moving faster than expected, which would compress the timeline for all American forces. "I need to get word to Alpha Company," Williams muttered, studying the convoy through his own binoculars. "If they don't know about the timing change, this whole operation goes to hell." Sarah continued working with the radios while keeping one eye on the developing situation below. The convoy had stopped near a bridge that crossed a narrow stream. Enemy soldiers were dismounting and setting up security positions, suggesting they might be planning to rest or conduct maintenance on their vehicles. This was exactly the kind of development that needed to be communicated to all American units immediately. A stationary convoy was a much easier target than one in motion, but only if everyone acted with precise coordination. The communication breakdown was turning a potential victory into a dangerous confusion. "Martinez, can you get any signal through to Alpha?" Williams asked, the tension evident in his voice. "Intermittent contact only," Sarah replied, still adjusting frequencies. "I can get a few words through, but not enough for detailed coordination." Williams made a decision that surprised everyone around him. "Take your portable radio and move to the northern edge of the ridge. Maybe you can get better reception from there." It was an unusual order for support personnel, but Sarah didn't hesitate. She grabbed her portable communications equipment and began moving carefully along the rocky ridgeline. The terrain was treacherous in the darkness, with loose rocks and steep drop-offs, but she had grown up hiking in similar conditions. As she moved, Sarah maintained her professional focus on the communications problem, but part of her mind was automatically cataloging other details. The enemy convoy was approximately 800 meters away, well within the effective range of a skilled marksman. The vehicles were positioned in a natural depression that provided excellent concealment from air attack, but made them vulnerable to fire from elevated positions. She reached the northern edge of the ridge and set up her equipment behind a cluster of large rocks that provided both cover and concealment. The new position offered improved line of sight to Alpha Company's location, and she quickly established clearer radio contact. Alpha 6, this is Bravo Communications, she whispered into her handset. Convoy has stopped near the bridge, 15 vehicles with security elements deployed. The response came back clearer than any communication she had managed all evening. Roger, Bravo Communications. We see the convoy, waiting for execute order. Sarah relayed the message back to her team leader and continued monitoring all frequencies. From her new position, she had an excellent view of both the enemy convoy and the American positions. She could see Alpha Company soldiers moving into better firing positions, taking advantage of the enemy's unexpected halt. The night air was cold and still, perfect conditions for long-range shooting. Sarah found herself automatically calculating wind speed and direction, range to target, and elevation differences. Her father's training was so deeply ingrained that she performed these mental calculations without conscious thought. Through her binoculars, she watched enemy soldiers moving around their vehicles. They appeared relaxed and confident, apparently unaware that American forces were observing their every move. One soldier in particular caught her attention, a man who seemed to be directing the others and carrying what appeared to be communication equipment. Sarah recognized him as likely being the convoy commander or senior communications specialist. In her father's lessons about military tactics, he had always emphasized that eliminating key leadership could disrupt an entire enemy operation more effectively than destroying equipment or vehicles. The thought made her uncomfortable. She was support personnel, not a combat soldier. Her job was to maintain communications and coordinate between units, not to identify enemy targets or plan attacks. But she couldn't ignore what she was seeing, and the information might be valuable to the soldiers who would actually conduct the assault. She reported the enemy dispositions to Staff Sergeant Williams, describing the location of what appeared to be command personnel and communication equipment. Williams acknowledged her report and passed the information along to the rifle companies that would conduct the actual attack. As she continued monitoring the radios, Sarah noticed that her new position offered something unexpected, a clear field of fire to the enemy convoy. The thought surprised her, and she quickly pushed it aside. She was a communications specialist, not a sniper, regardless of her personal background and training. But the tactical situation continued to develop in ways that made her increasingly uncomfortable with her passive role. The enemy convoy showed signs of preparing to move again, which would complicate the planned ambush. American forces needed to act soon or risk losing this opportunity entirely. Sarah maintained her focus on the communications equipment, ensuring that all American units had the information they needed to execute their mission. But she couldn't shake the feeling that events were building toward something larger than anyone had anticipated. The night was still young, and the enemy convoy represented a significant threat to American operations in the region. Whatever happened next, Sarah was determined to perform her duties with the same precision and professionalism that had defined her military service. Even if others didn't recognize her contributions, she knew that reliable communications could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The first shots came from Charlie Company at exactly 2:47 hours, but they were aimed at the wrong targets. Sarah watched in horror through her binoculars as muzzle flashes erupted from the southern ridge, striking empty vehicles instead of the enemy soldiers who had moved to different positions during their rest stop. Charlie Company has initiated contact prematurely, she reported urgently into her handset. They're hitting abandoned vehicles. Enemy personnel have relocated to defensive positions. The convoy commander she had been watching earlier was now shouting orders and pointing toward the American positions. Within seconds, enemy soldiers were returning disciplined fire toward both Charlie Company and Alpha Company positions. The carefully planned ambush had become a chaotic firefight with American forces at a serious disadvantage. Sarah watched the tactical situation deteriorate rapidly. The enemy had better cover than anticipated, and their return fire was more accurate than intelligence reports had suggested. Several American soldiers were pinned down and unable to maneuver, while the enemy began organizing a coordinated counterattack. "Williams, Charlie jumped the gun," she reported back to her team leader. "Enemy forces are in covered positions and returning effective fire." Staff Sergeant Williams came back immediately. "Can you raise battalion? We need immediate air support or this operation is going to fall apart." Sarah switched to the battalion frequency, but encountered the same atmospheric interference that had plagued communications all night. She could hear fragments of conversations, but not enough to coordinate close air support or artillery fire. The American forces on the ridge were effectively on their own. Through her binoculars, Sarah could see the enemy commander directing his soldiers with impressive tactical skill. He was moving between positions, apparently coordinating fields of fire and planning flanking movements that could outmaneuver the American forces. If he succeeded in organizing an effective counterattack, the scattered American companies could be defeated in detail. The commander was approximately 750 meters from Sarah's position, clearly visible in her optics and completely unaware that he was being observed. He represented the key to the entire enemy operation. Eliminate him, and the coordinated defense would likely collapse into confusion. Sarah found herself calculating the shot automatically. 750 meters, slight crosswind from the left, enemy target moving predictably between covered positions. With her father's rifle and her own training, it would be a challenging but manageable shot. With military equipment, the variables became more complex, but still within her capabilities. The thought troubled her deeply. She was communications support, not a sniper. Her job was to coordinate between friendly forces, not to engage enemy targets directly. But the tactical situation was spiraling out of control, and American soldiers were in serious danger. "Martinez, what's the status on battalion comms?" Williams called over the radio. "Still getting interference," Sarah replied. "I can't establish reliable contact for fire support coordination." She continued monitoring the firefight while working frantically with her radio equipment. Alpha Company was reporting casualties and requesting immediate medical evacuation. Charlie Company was taking heavy fire and running low on ammunition. Without air support or artillery, the American forces were outgunned and outmaneuvered. Sarah watched the enemy commander move to a new position where he could observe both American companies simultaneously. He was clearly planning something that would put more American soldiers at risk. She could see enemy soldiers moving to flanking positions under his direction, setting up for assaults that could overwhelm the scattered American defenses. The moral weight of her situation pressed down on her like a physical force. She had the training and position to potentially change the outcome of the battle, but doing so would mean abandoning her assigned role and taking action far beyond her authority. Military discipline demanded that she stick to her communications duties and trust others to handle combat operations. But American soldiers were dying while she maintained radio watch on frequencies that no longer carried clear signals. The enemy commander continued coordinating attacks that were systematically destroying the American tactical advantage. Every minute she hesitated meant more casualties among soldiers she had trained with and served alongside. Sarah made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life, regardless of the outcome. She carefully set down her radio equipment and reached for the rifle she had been issued for personal protection. It was a standard infantry weapon, not the precision instrument she would have preferred, but it was what she had available. Moving carefully to maintain concealment, Sarah positioned herself behind the rocks that had been shielding her communications equipment. She adjusted the rifle's sights for the range and conditions, drawing on years of training with her father in the Montana wilderness. The fundamental skills were the same, even if the stakes were infinitely higher. Through the rifle scope, she could see the enemy commander more clearly than ever before. He was a professional soldier, probably in his 30s, with the confident bearing of someone who had survived many combat operations. He was also the key to an enemy defense that was systematically destroying American forces. Sarah controlled her breathing and waited for the optimal moment. Military sniping was as much about patience as accuracy, and her father had taught her that rushing a critical shot was the fastest way to miss entirely. She would have one opportunity, and the lives of her fellow soldiers depended on her making it count. The enemy commander moved to yet another position, this one offering him an even better view of the American forces. Sarah could see him pointing and giving orders that would likely result in more American casualties. The tactical situation demanded immediate action, but she forced herself to wait for the perfect moment when her shot would have the greatest chance of success. Her finger found the trigger as her father had taught her years ago in the mountains of Montana, when the only stakes were family pride and hunting success. Now, the outcome would determine whether American soldiers lived or died, whether the mission succeeded or failed, and whether her decision to abandon her assigned role would be vindicated or condemned. The shot that would change everything was only seconds away. The shot broke the mountain silence at exactly 3:14 hours. 750 meters away, the enemy commander dropped instantly, his radio flying from his hands as he collapsed behind the rocks where he had been coordinating the counterattack against American forces. Sarah worked the rifle bolt smoothly, chambering another round while maintaining her sight picture through the scope. Years of practice with her father had made the motion automatic, requiring no conscious thought even under the stress of combat. She held her position, watching for secondary targets and evaluating the immediate effects of her shot. The impact on enemy morale was immediate and visible. Soldiers who had been moving confidently between positions suddenly became hesitant and confused. The disciplined return fire that had been pinning down American forces became sporadic and poorly coordinated. Without their commander's tactical leadership, the enemy defense began to fragment. "What the hell was that?" Staff Sergeant Williams demanded over the radio. "Who's firing from the communications position?" Sarah keyed her handset while maintaining her firing position. "Enemy commander is down, continuing to observe for additional targets." The response was immediate and angry. "Martinez, get back on those radios immediately. Leave the shooting to the infantry." But Sarah could see through her scope that the tactical situation was still developing. Several enemy soldiers were attempting to reach their fallen commander, probably trying to recover his radio equipment and re-establish command and control. If they succeeded, the coordinated defense would resume, and American forces would again be at a serious disadvantage. She engaged the closest enemy soldier at 600 meters, dropping him as he attempted to reach the commander's position. The second soldier immediately took cover, but his position was clearly visible from Sarah's elevated vantage point. Her third shot at 570 meters eliminated another threat to American forces. The psychological effect on the remaining enemy soldiers was devastating. They had been confident and aggressive while under competent leadership, but the loss of their commander and the unknown sniper fire from an unexpected direction shattered their cohesion. Enemy soldiers began withdrawing from forward positions, abandoning equipment and vehicles in their haste to escape. "Alpha Company, this is Bravo Communications," Sarah reported. "Enemy forces are withdrawing from positions north of the bridge. Recommend immediate advance to secure abandoned equipment." Alpha Company acknowledged and began moving forward cautiously. Within minutes, they were reporting that enemy resistance had collapsed completely. The convoy that had been successfully defending against American attack was now in full retreat, abandoning vehicles, weapons, and supplies. Sarah maintained her overwatch position, scanning for enemy soldiers who might be attempting to establish new defensive positions or coordinate a counterattack. Through her scope, she could see American soldiers advancing methodically through the abandoned enemy positions, securing valuable intelligence and equipment. "Charlie Company reports enemy vehicles fleeing south," came the report over her radio. "No organized resistance remaining in the area." The firefight that had threatened to become a disaster for American forces was now a complete victory. The enemy convoy had been destroyed or captured, along with significant intelligence materials and communication equipment. Most importantly, American casualties were minimal compared to what might have happened if the enemy counterattack had succeeded. Staff Sergeant Williams appeared at Sarah's position 20 minutes later, his expression mixing anger and confusion. "Martinez, what the hell do you think you were doing? Your communications support, not infantry." Sarah secured her rifle and returned to her radio equipment before responding. "The enemy commander was coordinating effective resistance against our forces. Eliminating him was necessary to prevent American casualties." "That's not your decision to make," Williams replied sharply. You're supposed to maintain communications, not take independent action in combat. Before Sarah could respond, Lieutenant Colonel Harrison's voice crackled over the command frequency. All stations, this is Thunder 6. I need immediate accountability of all personnel. We're getting reports of exceptional marksmanship from unknown positions. Williams grabbed the handset and responded. Thunder 6, Bravo Communications reports all personnel present and accounted for. Roger, Bravo Communications. Thunder 6 is inbound to your location for immediate debrief. Maintain current positions until further notice. Sarah felt a cold knot forming in her stomach. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison was the battalion commander, a combat veteran with 3 deployments and a reputation for demanding absolute adherence to military discipline. Her decision to abandon her communications duties and engage enemy targets was about to face the highest level of scrutiny. Williams began questioning her about every detail of her actions during the firefight. How many rounds had she fired? What was her justification for engaging enemy targets? Had she maintained proper communications protocols while conducting unauthorized combat operations? Sarah answered each question honestly and completely. She had fired 4 rounds, achieving 3 confirmed eliminations, including the enemy commander. Her justification was the immediate tactical necessity of preventing coordinated enemy resistance that was threatening American lives. She had maintained communications as much as possible while engaging targets of opportunity. You realize you could face court-martial for this, Williams warned. Taking independent action outside your assigned role, abandoning your primary duties, engaging in combat operations without authorization, any one of those charges could end your military career. Sarah understood the seriousness of her situation, but she felt no regret about her actions. American soldiers were alive because of her decision to engage the enemy commander. The mission had succeeded because she had used her training and position to eliminate a critical threat. Military regulations were important, but saving lives was more important. As they waited for the battalion commander's arrival, Sarah continued monitoring radio frequencies and coordinating between the scattered American units. The post-battle situation required careful management to ensure that all personnel were accounted for and that captured equipment was properly secured. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was performing her regular communications duties while simultaneously facing potential disciplinary action for the very combat effectiveness that had saved the mission. Military bureaucracy often failed to recognize that rigid adherence to assigned roles could sometimes conflict with tactical necessity. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison's helicopter touched down on the ridge 37 minutes later, bringing with it the judgment that would determine Sarah's military future. Everything she had worked for during her 2 years of service now hung in the balance, dependent on how a senior officer would interpret her split-second decision to prioritize mission success over regulatory compliance. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison emerged from the helicopter with the bearing of a soldier who had seen too much combat to be impressed by anything except results. He was accompanied by Major Stevens, the battalion intelligence officer, and Captain Rodriguez from the operations section. Their presence indicated that Sarah's actions had attracted attention far beyond her immediate chain of command. Staff Sergeant Williams immediately approached the group and began explaining the night's events. Sarah remained at her communications position, continuing to monitor radio frequencies while watching the senior officers examine the battlefield through binoculars. She could hear fragments of their conversation carried by the mountain wind. Enemy commander eliminated at approximately 750 meters, Williams reported. 3 confirmed kills total, resulting in complete collapse of enemy resistance. Major Stevens was studying the enemy positions through his binoculars, occasionally making notes in a small notebook. The tactical situation makes sense, he commented. Without coordination, their defensive positions became isolated and untenable. Captain Rodriguez joined the conversation. Alpha and Charlie companies both report minimal resistance after the initial contact. Enemy forces abandoned equipment and withdrew in disorder. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison listened to these reports while continuing to observe the battlefield. His expression remained neutral, revealing nothing about his assessment of the situation or Sarah's role in it. After several minutes, he turned and walked directly toward her position. "Specialist Martinez," he said formally, I understand you took independent action during the firefight. Sarah stood at attention and responded with military precision. Yes, sir. I engaged enemy targets that were threatening American forces. Explain your reasoning, Harrison ordered, his tone neither approving nor disapproving. Sarah organized her thoughts carefully before responding. Sir, the enemy commander was coordinating effective resistance that was causing American casualties. Communications were compromised due to atmospheric interference, preventing coordination of air support or artillery. The tactical situation required immediate action to prevent further losses. Harrison studied her for a long moment before speaking again. What's your background with long-range shooting, specialist? My father was a Marine sniper, sir. He trained me from an early age in marksmanship and field craft. I qualified expert with multiple weapon systems during basic training. But you're assigned to communications, Harrison observed. Yes, sir. That was the available position when I enlisted. Major Stevens joined the conversation. Colonel, I've been reviewing the tactical sequence. The enemy commander's elimination occurred at the exact moment when their counterattack was gaining momentum. Without that intervention, we could have faced significant casualties. Captain Rodriguez nodded in agreement. Both company commanders report that enemy resistance collapsed immediately after the sniper fire began. The timing was critical to mission success. Harrison continued studying Sarah while processing this information. Specialist, you abandoned your assigned duties to engage in combat operations without authorization. Do you understand the potential consequences? Yes, sir, Sarah replied without hesitation. But American soldiers were in danger, and I had the training and position to help them. Military discipline exists for good reasons, Harrison continued. When soldiers take independent action outside their assigned roles, it can create chaos and confusion that gets people killed. Sarah felt her heart sinking as the battalion commander seemed to be building a case against her actions. Everything she had feared about military bureaucracy appeared to be coming true. Regulations mattered more than results, and initiative was punished rather than rewarded. But Harrison wasn't finished speaking. However, he continued, there are times when tactical situations develop faster than command structures can respond. In those cases, junior leaders must make decisions based on their assessment of immediate threats and opportunities. Major Stevens spoke up again. Sir, if I may, Specialist Martinez maintained communications throughout the engagement. She never completely abandoned her primary duties, even while engaging enemy targets. Sarah was surprised to hear this support from a senior officer she had never met before. Williams had made it clear that her actions were inappropriate, but the battalion staff seemed to have a different perspective on the tactical situation. Specialist Martinez, Harrison said, your actions tonight resulted in mission success and saved American lives. However, they also demonstrated that you're not being utilized to your full potential in your current assignment. Sarah wasn't sure how to respond to this unexpected turn in the conversation. She had been preparing for disciplinary action, not career counseling. Captain Rodriguez pulled out a folder and consulted several documents. Martinez, your military records show expert qualification with multiple weapon systems, outstanding performance evaluations, and recommendations for advanced training. Why haven't you applied for reclassification to a combat specialty? I've submitted several requests, sir, Sarah replied. They were all denied due to the needs of the service and my current military occupational specialty. Harrison studied the documents Rodriguez had provided. Major Stevens, what's our current requirement for qualified snipers? Critical shortage, sir. We have authorization for 12 sniper positions, but only 7 qualified personnel. Training pipeline is backed up for at least 8 months. Harrison made a decision that would change Sarah's entire military career. Captain Rodriguez, I want Specialist Martinez enrolled in the next available sniper school class. Expedite the paperwork and make it happen. Sarah felt the blood rushing in her ears as she processed what she had just heard. Instead of facing disciplinary action, she was being offered the opportunity she had been seeking since enlisting in the Army. Thank you, sir, she managed to say. Don't thank me yet, Harrison replied with what might have been the hint of a smile. Sniper school has a 70% failure rate, and being able to make one good shot doesn't guarantee you can complete the training. Major Stevens added, You'll also need to maintain your communication skills as a secondary specialty. Snipers often serve as forward observers and need excellent radio discipline. As the senior officers prepared to depart, Harrison had one final comment for Sarah. Tonight you proved that talent and training matter more than assigned duties. But remember that military effectiveness comes from both individual excellence and team coordination. Don't let success make you forget the importance of working within the system. The helicopter lifted off, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts and her equipment on the mountain ridge. In less than one night, she had gone from overlooked support personnel to a candidate for one of the Army's most elite specialties. The shot that had eliminated the enemy commander had also eliminated the barriers that had been limiting her military career. 6 months later, Sarah Martinez stood at the graduation ceremony for the Army Sniper School at Fort Benning, one of only 4 students to complete the grueling program out of the original class of 13. The training had been everything Lieutenant Colonel Harrison had warned her about, and more physically demanding, mentally exhausting, and technically challenging beyond anything she had experienced in her military career. The ceremony took place on the same rifle range where she had spent countless hours perfecting her marksmanship skills. Her father had driven down from Montana to watch his daughter receive the recognition he had always known she deserved. Sitting in the audience were also several soldiers from her original unit, including Staff Sergeant Williams, who had eventually become one of her strongest supporters. "Distinguished graduate, Specialist Sarah Martinez," announced the school commandant as she stepped forward to receive her certificate and the coveted sniper badge. The achievement represented not just personal success, but validation of her decision that night on the ridge when she chose mission accomplishment over regulatory compliance. The 6 months of training had been transformative in ways that went beyond military skills. Sarah had learned advanced marksmanship techniques that made her teenage training seem elementary by comparison. She had mastered fieldcraft skills that allowed her to remain undetected in hostile territory for days at a time. Most importantly, she had developed the mental discipline required to make life-and-death decisions under extreme pressure. But the technical training was only part of what she had gained. For the first time in her military career, Sarah was surrounded by instructors and fellow students who recognized her abilities and pushed her to excel rather than simply conform. The competitive environment at Sniper School rewarded innovation and independent thinking within the framework of military discipline. Her performance had exceeded even her own expectations. Sarah finished second in her class in overall marksmanship, first in fieldcraft and camouflage, and received the highest scores ever recorded by a female student in stalking exercises. More importantly, she had earned the respect of instructors who were known for their demanding standards and reluctance to accept anything less than perfection. After the graduation ceremony, Sarah was approached by Major Stevens, who had traveled to Fort Benning specifically to discuss her next assignment. The intelligence officer who had supported her on the ridge now had new opportunities to offer. "Specialist Martinez," Stevens said, "I have an interesting proposition for you. How would you feel about joining a special operations task force that's being formed for deployment to Afghanistan?" Sarah felt a familiar mixture of excitement and apprehension. Special operations represented the highest level of military service, but it also meant increased danger and responsibility. "What would be my role, sir?" "Precision marksman and communications specialist," Stevens replied. "Your unique combination of skills makes you valuable for missions that require both long-range shooting and coordination with multiple units." It was exactly the kind of assignment Sarah had dreamed about when she first enlisted, but never imagined she would actually receive. The path from overlooked communications support to special operations sniper had seemed impossible just 6 months ago. "There's one condition," Stevens continued. "You'll be working with a team that includes several soldiers who initially questioned whether women belong in combat roles. Your performance will be scrutinized more closely than male team members, and you'll need to prove yourself repeatedly." Sarah smiled at this familiar challenge. "Sir, I've been proving myself repeatedly since the day I enlisted. I'm ready for whatever comes next." The conversation was interrupted by Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, who had also made the trip to Fort Benning for the graduation ceremony. "Specialist Martinez, congratulations on your achievement. I understand Major Stevens has made you an interesting offer." "Yes, sir. Special operations deployment to Afghanistan." Harrison nodded approvingly. You've earned the opportunity through your performance at sniper school and your actions on the ridge, but remember that this is just the beginning. Special operations will test everything you've learned and more. As the ceremony concluded and guests began departing, Sarah found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. The shot that had eliminated the enemy commander on the ridge had been a defining moment, but it was only one step in a longer process of proving her worth in an environment that had initially rejected her contributions. Her father approached as she was packing her gear. "I'm proud of you, Sarah," he said simply. "You've honored everything I taught you in the mountains, and you've gone far beyond what I ever achieved." "Thank you, Dad. Your training saved my life and the lives of other soldiers. Everything starts with the fundamentals you taught me." As they walked toward the parking lot, Sarah's father asked about her plans for the future. "Special operations is dangerous work," he observed. "Are you prepared for what that means?" Sarah considered the question seriously before responding. "Dad, I've spent 2 years being told that I don't belong in combat roles. Now I have the chance to serve at the highest level and prove that talent and training matter more than assumptions about gender or background. I have to take that opportunity." Her father nodded with understanding. "Then make sure you come home safely. Your mother and I want to see how far this journey takes you." The next morning, Sarah reported to her new unit for the beginning of pre-deployment training. She was no longer the overlooked communications specialist who had been relegated to support roles despite her qualifications. She was now a trained sniper with orders to join one of the Army's most elite units. The transformation had begun with a single shot on a mountain ridge in Afghanistan, but it had been completed through months of demanding training and unwavering commitment to excellence. Sarah Martinez had finally found her place in the military, not as someone who was tolerated despite her gender, but as a soldier whose skills were essential to mission success. As she walked into the Special Operations compound for the first time, Sarah carried with her the confidence that came from proving herself under the most demanding circumstances. The young woman who had once been dismissed as only support was now prepared to take her place among the Army's most capable warriors. The journey from that cold mountain ridge to this moment had been longer and more challenging than she had ever imagined, but it had been worth every obstacle and setback. Sarah Martinez was finally where she belonged.